I'm Madison Blake, 24 years old, and after 4 years at Stanford, I thought my graduation day would finally be the moment my parents looked at me with pride. I reserved 3 VIP seats, sent them maps and reminders, and I walked on stage with my heart full of hope. But when I turned my head, the seats with my family's names were empty. They had left me not by accident but to help my sister move into her new apartment. Hundreds of families cheered, flowers filled the air, and the cameras caught my smile while inside I was breaking. Then the dean took the microphone and announced that the AI project I had built had just been licensed by Oracle for $3.2 million. The entire hall rose in applause, and I stood there in the spotlight alone. Have you ever been abandoned by your own family on the most important day of your life? Stay with me, because what happened after that will change the way you see loyalty, success, and family forever. The stage lights were blinding, washing over the deep red curtains and gleaming across rows of smiling faces. My name hadn't been called yet, but I was already standing in the front row with the other top graduates, cap perfectly balanced on my head, gown flowing down to my ankles. Around me the air buzzed with applause, camera shutters, and the high-pitched cheers of parents calling their children's names. Bouquets of lilies, roses, and sunflowers were lifted into the air, ready to be pressed into proud hands. I glanced quickly to the right, to the section reserved for families. 3 seats bore a white card that read Blake Family. They were in the very front, the kind of seats I had envisioned for months, the kind of seats where I had imagined my mother's smile, my father's stiff pride, and maybe even Rachel's camera flashing as she caught my big moment. But those 3 chairs sat empty, the paper signs curling at the edges under the faint stir of the air conditioner. I held my chin high as the crowd erupted for another student. Somewhere behind me a mother shouted, "You did it, baby," her voice cracking with emotion. A father jumped to his feet holding a bouquet nearly half his size. I forced my lips into a curve that I hoped looked like joy, but inside I felt the sharp tug of absence. Every seat filled with love except for mine. The dean's voice filled the hall, steady and warm, reading the names in careful order. I stared straight ahead, fixing my eyes on the polished wood of the podium, refusing to glance again at the empty row that should have belonged to me. My hands rested tightly on the name card, the edges digging into my palms. The camera swung down my row, catching each of us in turn. A spotlight lingered on my face. I smiled, not too wide, steady, calm. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the whir of the local news station's lens. I thought about how people watching at home would see only a composed graduate, not the storm that churned beneath the surface. A whisper reached my ears. "Congratulations, Maddie," someone behind me said softly. I nodded without turning. My heart beat hard against my ribs. The applause rose again as another student walked across the stage, hugged by parents who rushed to meet them. I tried not to let my eyes search for anyone waiting for me. In that moment, my mind betrayed me, painting a picture of what was really happening. My mother, Linda, laughing as she balanced a box labeled kitchen in her arms. My father, Thomas, unlocking the trunk of his sedan in the bright San Francisco sun. My younger sister, Rachel, snapping selfies in her brand new apartment, giddy to show off the space she had barely signed the lease for. They were there carrying lamps and bags of clothes, arranging furniture, talking about curtains. They were not here, not in the hall where their oldest daughter was about to take the biggest step of her life. A burst of clapping jolted me back. The graduate before me shook the dean's hand, her parents leaping up with flowers. The cameras turned. My name was next. The announcer paused, looking down at the list, clearing his throat. I inhaled, smoothed the front of my gown, and pressed my lips together to steady the tremor. In the corner of my vision, the white cards on those empty seats fluttered again, like a reminder written by the universe. I told myself silently, "You will walk, you will smile. Even if no one is here for you." The music swelled and the audience hushed in anticipation. My pulse surged in my ears. I stepped forward, eyes fixed on the stage ahead, determined not to look back at the 3 vacant chairs that echoed louder than any cheer. And as my heels clicked against the wooden floor, the scene of my family unpacking Rachel's apartment flared in my mind once more, cruelly vivid, before I forced it down and focused on the path to the podium. That was the moment I knew I had been left on stage, not just by accident, but by choice. And I had no option but to keep walking. I kept my steps steady, but inside I was already somewhere else, pulled back into years that had trained me for this very emptiness. The silence of those 3 empty chairs had a familiar weight, the same kind of weight that had followed me from childhood. In Portland, our 2-story house had a wide porch with peeling white paint and a garden my father never quite managed to keep alive. From the outside, it looked like any other middle-class home, but inside there was a pattern, one that never shifted. My mother, Linda, loved an audience, and whenever neighbors or friends stopped by, she would call Rachel to the living room. Rachel, with her dark curls bouncing and her bright smile, would sing a children's song or hold up a drawing of a stick figure family, or later, as she grew older, pose with her small camera. My mother would beam with pride, leaning against the doorway as if she had produced a miracle. I would sit quietly on the edge of the couch, my math test with a perfect score folded on my lap, never invited to share it. When I tried once to hand it over, my mother took it with a glance and set it on the coffee table without a word. Her attention snapped back to Rachel, who had just managed a shaky rendition of a pop song. The guests clapped politely. My mother clapped the loudest. I swallowed hard, feeling my throat tighten. It was like that for years. Rachel was the golden child, the one everyone wanted to see, while I blended into the background. At school, I poured myself into books, chasing top grades, hoping maybe numbers and awards would speak louder than songs or pictures. But at home, they never did. On my 16th birthday, I thought maybe things would be different. I had spent weeks imagining a family dinner at the small Italian place near the river, a cake with candles, my parents and Rachel dressed nicely taking photos together. That Saturday morning, the house smelled like chocolate cake baking, and I felt a lightness I had not felt in months. But in the afternoon, Rachel called from the mall, crying to my mother over the phone that she needed a new dress for her friend's party. Without hesitation, my parents grabbed their keys. "We will be back in time," my mother said, already ushering Rachel out the door. My father nodded, barely glancing at me. I stood in the kitchen watching the cake still rising in the oven. Hours later, the sun had long set and I sat alone at the table with a cold cake and a scribbled card that said, "Sorry, we are late." Rachel was laughing in her room, trying on the dress they had bought her. I forced myself to light the candles alone, blew them out and cut a slice with hands that trembled. That night I smiled at myself in the mirror, but it was the kind of smile that cracked the moment no one was looking. By senior year in high school, I had learned to stop expecting. I focused on my science project, pouring every spare hour into building a model that could classify waste using basic artificial intelligence. When I won first place at the state science fair, the invitation to City Hall for an award ceremony felt like proof that maybe I mattered after all. I asked my parents to come. They nodded, saying yes, but on the morning of the ceremony, they texted me that Rachel had a cold and they could not leave her alone. I walked across the stage at City Hall holding my plaque, staring at the crowd of parents cheering for their children. I searched the rows out of instinct, even though I already knew. My stomach ached with the same hollow emptiness as the 3 chairs years later. Afterward, I stood outside alone, the spring wind sharp against my face, the plaque heavy in my hands. I told myself it was enough, that the recognition from strangers was enough, but inside the absence burned like a fresh wound. It was in those moments that the truth slowly took shape, a truth I had resisted for years. Rachel was always going to be the star in their story, the daughter who deserved applause, the one who needed them most. I was the shadow, expected to shine on my own without anyone watching. One evening, not long after, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. My mother's voice was soft but firm. "Rachel needs more of us. Maddie will be fine. She always is." My father hummed his agreement, the sound of the refrigerator door closing punctuating the end of the conversation. I froze in the hallway, my fingers pressed to the wall, my chest tight. That was the confirmation I had never wanted but always suspected. I returned to my room that night and lay awake staring at the ceiling, the streetlight outside casting a pale glow across my walls. I thought about all the times I had waited for them to notice me, all the times I had tried to earn their pride with medals and certificates. None of it had been enough. not because I lacked value, but because they had already chosen where to place their pride. The realization didn't come like a shout. It settled like a whisper that spread through every corner of me. In my parents' eyes, Rachel was always going to be more important than I was, and if I wanted to be seen, it would never be through them. That knowledge sank deep into me, painful and steady, and though I tried to bury it, it followed me into every step of the years that came after. By the time I reached my last year of high school, I had already stopped hoping for their approval. Instead, I funneled every ounce of energy into grades and competitions. My teachers used to say I was relentless, that once I set my mind on something, I would not stop until I had mastered it. I liked the sound of that word, relentless, even if at home it never earned me more than a passing nod. The day the letter from Stanford arrived, I was alone in the kitchen. The envelope bore the crimson crest, and my hands trembled as I tore it open. Full scholarship. Tuition and housing completely covered. For a moment I let myself imagine their joy, maybe even a family dinner to celebrate. I waited until evening when my parents came back from work. I held the letter out, smiling so hard my cheeks ached. My mother glanced at it, then said, "Good, that saves us a lot of money." My father muttered, "Makes things easier," and picked up the newspaper. Rachel asked if anyone could drive her to her photography club meeting. The subject dropped before it had even begun. I remember folding the letter carefully and slipping it into my backpack, walking out into the chilly Portland night and sitting at the coffee shop down the street. I ordered a latte with the last $5 I had saved from babysitting, spread the letter on the table, and read it again and again until the words blurred. That evening, I realized that every step forward would have to be carried by me alone. When I moved into the Stanford dorms the following September, I felt both terrified and free. The campus buzzed with bicycles, palm trees swayed in the California sun, and everything smelled faintly of eucalyptus. For the first time, I was surrounded by students whose parents had flown across the country to settle them in, parents who hung string lights in dorm rooms and stocked mini fridges with snacks. Mine had dropped me at the curb with 2 suitcases and a shortwave goodbye before driving south to see Rachel's latest photo exhibit. I quickly found work in the computer science department. The lab was dim and cold, with rows of humming servers and stacks of monitors glowing green. My job was simple at first, entering data into spreadsheets, cleaning up files for graduate students, checking error logs. It was not glamorous, but I loved it. Each night after finishing the assigned tasks, I lingered, pulling up tutorials on coding, scribbling notes in the margins of discarded printouts. I often stayed past midnight, the fluorescent lights buzzing above me. I taught myself Python by trial and error, line after line of code that failed until finally something clicked. I remember the thrill of watching a small script sort images correctly for the first time, the neat green text on the black screen declaring success. It was like a secret language that no one could take from me. One night, Professor Henry Miller, head of the lab, walked in while I was bent over the keyboard. He was tall, gray-haired, and known for his sharp eye. He leaned against the doorway and watched silently for a while before saying, "You know, most undergraduates don't stay this late." I spun in my chair, embarrassed. I was just finishing something. He stepped closer, scanning the messy lines of code on the screen. Then he smiled, a rare thing for him. "You have potential. Don't waste it." Those words echoed in me louder than any praise I had ever heard at home. From then on, he began assigning me small projects. I would test algorithms, clean up scripts, help optimize models that the graduate students were too busy to polish. It was demanding, but every success felt like climbing a mountain that no one thought I could climb. There were nights when exhaustion nearly broke me. I would stumble back to my dorm at 2 a.m, collapse on the narrow bed, my hands still tingling from typing. The other girls in my hall went out to parties or curled up on the floor watching movies. I envied their carefree laughter, but I knew that for me every hour counted. Still, there were moments of quiet triumph. The first time I trained a rudimentary model and watched it recognize images with accuracy higher than random chance, my breath caught in my throat. The screen glowed with numbers and graphs, nothing beautiful to anyone else, but to me it was like fireworks. I whispered to myself, You did this, Maddie, and for a second I almost believed that it mattered more than whether anyone at home ever noticed. Professor Miller stopped by my desk the next morning and studied the results. He tapped the paper lightly with his finger and said, "This is good work. You could take this further." My heart pounded as I nodded, pretending to stay calm. His recognition was the closest thing I had to a parent's pride. Every breakthrough carried me deeper into the world I had chosen. Every late night reminded me of the silence waiting at home, but also of the light I could create for myself. The day my model ran smoothly for the first time, the screen filling with clean lines of output, I sat back in my chair and let the green glow wash over me. It was not a bouquet of flowers or applause from a crowded hall. It was a steady, quiet confirmation that I could build something real even if the people who should have clapped for me never would. I stared at that screen until my vision blurred, feeling the warmth of accomplishment spread through my chest, and realized that for the first time I was not thinking about whether anyone would approve. I was thinking about what I could do next. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I listened to my mother's voice on the other end. She was bubbling with excitement, telling me how Rachel had just been chosen to lead her photography club's new project. How the apartment Rachel found in downtown Portland had high ceilings and so much natural light. How the landlord, even complimented her on her sense of style. My father chimed in, laughing about how they had spent an entire weekend carrying boxes up the narrow stairwell because Rachel wanted everything arranged just right before her first official shoot in the new place. I pressed the phone to my ear and smiled faintly, waiting for my name to be mentioned. Waiting for the moment they might ask about my work, my classes, my late nights at the lab. After a long stretch of chatter, my mother paused and said, "You're doing okay, right, Maddie?" I opened my mouth to answer, but she was already laughing again about how Rachel had convinced a local cafe to display her prints. My words never even formed. When the call ended, I sat on the edge of my dorm bed staring at the blank wall. The silence in my room was so sharp it felt like it pressed against my skin. I could hear laughter down the hall, doors slamming, footsteps rushing past, but inside my four white walls it was only me and the hum of the mini fridge. I set the phone down and rubbed my eyes. It was always the same. They were full of stories about Rachel and left me with a single question that barely touched the surface of my life. The next morning in the lab, Professor Miller stopped by my desk. He leaned over, scanning the code I had been running, and asked me how I felt about traveling. I blinked, unsure if I heard correctly. "There is a conference in San Francisco next month," he explained, "a gathering of researchers and industry leaders. I want you to attend, Madison. You've earned the chance to present your work." For a moment I thought he must be joking. Present my name on a paper. He handed me an envelope with the embossed seal of the conference and told me to read it carefully. His tone was calm, but his eyes held the spark of pride I had never once seen in my parents. That night I returned to my dorm with the envelope clutched in my backpack. I set it on the desk and stared at it as if it might vanish. My roommate was out the room, dim, except for the desk lamp. My fingers shook as I broke the seal and pulled out the letter. There it was in black ink, "Accepted for presentation, Madison Blake." My name spelled correctly, printed clearly, no longer hidden in the footnotes or beneath someone else's headline. I sat back in my chair and read it again, running my thumb over the raised lettering. A small laugh escaped me, soft and disbelieving. I had grown used to being invisible to achievements tucked away in drawers, to celebrations that never came. Now here was a piece of paper telling me that someone outside my family, outside that closed circle, believed I was worth seeing. I wanted to call home and share the news, but the thought withered before I even reached for the phone. I could already hear the distracted tone in my mother's voice, the way she would say, "That's nice, honey," before shifting back to Rachel's next exhibition. Instead, I folded the letter neatly and pinned it to the corkboard above my desk. In the days that followed, the weight of that invitation carried me through the hardest hours. When I stared too long at strings of code that refused to compile, I glanced at the letter. When exhaustion pressed down, I remembered that somewhere beyond the narrow world of my family, there were people who wanted to hear what I had to say. Still, the ache of being set aside never truly dulled. One evening, after another short call with my parents that revolved around Rachel's new furniture and the party she planned to host in her apartment, I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling. I whispered into the empty room. Why is she always the only one who matters? The ceiling gave no answer, only the steady hum of the air vent above me. The contrast was sharp. In the lab, Professor Miller trusted me with more complex tasks, encouraging me to test theories that graduate students struggled with. He said things like, "You have an instinct for this," and "Your eye for detail is rare." Each word was a stone laid into a foundation I had been building in secret. At home, the foundation crumbled before it could even form. On the night I finally booked my train ticket to San Francisco, I took the invitation down from the board and held it in my lap. I ran my finger across my name again slowly, as if engraving it deeper into memory. In that moment, I allowed myself a quiet smile. For once, I was not waiting for a call, not waiting for recognition from people who never saw me. I closed my eyes, folded the letter carefully, and slid it back into the envelope. The room was quiet, but the silence felt different now. It was not empty. It was mine. The weeks slipped by quickly as the date of graduation grew closer. I found myself writing a careful email to my parents, double-checking every line before hitting send. I attached the map of the Stanford campus, highlighted the nearest parking lot, and even included the exact time I would be crossing the stage. I wanted to make it as easy as possible for them, no excuses. No reason they could say they got lost or didn't know where to go. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with a short reply from my mother. "We will be there. Proud of you." I read the words again and again, letting them soak in like water to dry ground. Proud of you. It was so rare to see those words directed at me that I saved the message in a folder on my phone as if storing proof of their care. That night, I allowed myself to dream. I pictured them sitting in the front row of the auditorium, the 3 reserved seats marked with our family name finally filled. I imagined my mother in her neat blouse. My father leaning forward with his hands clasped Rachel, waving at me with her camera raised to capture the moment. I pictured the applause ringing in my ears as I walked across the stage and reached for my diploma, their faces the first ones I would see in the crowd. For the first time in years, I fell asleep with a sense of hope curling softly in my chest. The night before the ceremony, I laid my gown across the back of the chair and set my cap neatly on the desk. My roommate teased me for rehearsing in front of the mirror, adjusting the tassel and practicing how I would smile. I laughed, embarrassed, but inside, I was counting down the hours, clinging to the idea that tomorrow would finally be my moment, one my parents could not take away. I ironed the wrinkles out of my white dress and polished my shoes until the leather gleamed. Every detail mattered. This was the day they would see me as more than the quiet daughter in the background. I set my alarm early, determined to have time to breathe and prepare without rushing. When the morning came, I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the fabric of my gown, adjusting the square cap on my head until it sat perfectly. My hands trembled as I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. I reached for my phone, half expecting to see a message of encouragement waiting. The screen lit up with a notification. My heart lifted for a second before I read the words. "Rachel just got the keys to her new apartment. We need to help her move today. Please understand." I froze, my fingers still gripping the edge of the phone. The words blurred and I had to blink hard to steady them. My chest tightened as if the air had been pulled out of the room. I read it again, hoping I had misunderstood, but the meaning was clear. They were not coming. They had chosen to carry Rachel's boxes instead of watching me cross the stage. I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, still in my gown, my reflection staring back from the mirror with its carefully placed cap and hopeful eyes that no longer matched how I felt inside. The buzzing of students celebrating in the courtyard drifted through the open window, laughter mixing with the sound of car doors slamming as families prepared to head to campus. I sat there gripping my phone, the message burning into me. My roommate walked in and stopped short when she saw me. Her smile faded as she asked if everything was okay. I forced my lips into a curve and nodded. "Yeah, just nerves." I slipped the phone into my bag before she could see. I could not bring myself to say it out loud, saying it would make it too real. As I straightened my cap again, my throat ached with the weight of silence. The dream of them cheering in the front row dissolved like smoke. I told myself to focus on the moment that was still mine. I had worked for this. No one could erase the years of effort I had poured into late nights and endless hours of study. I stood and adjusted the gown once more, lifting my chin as if that could hold the crack in my heart together. Walking out into the morning sun, I joined the stream of students in their gowns and caps, the air filled with the scent of flowers and the clicking of cameras. Parents called out to their children, waving proudly, arms full of bouquets and balloons. I moved quietly among them, a small island in the tide of celebration. I told myself to keep moving, to keep breathing, even as the message echoed in my mind. They had chosen Rachel again. Even today. Especially today. And there was nothing left for me to do but walk forward. The auditorium lights were bright enough to make the air feel sharp, as if every breath was thinner than usual. I adjusted my cap and found my seat in the front row, the section reserved for the top graduates. The fabric of my gown rustled against the chair as I sat down, my hands pressed together in my lap to stop them from trembling. All around me were families holding up cameras, balloons bobbing above their heads, and the scent of fresh roses carried on the drafts from the open doors. On my left, Emily's parents held up a glittering sign with her name in bold letters. She laughed, cheeks flushed as she waved at them. On my right, Daniel leaned down to accept a bouquet of lilies from his mother, who was practically glowing with pride. Their joy filled the air with something warm and alive. I let it wash over me, even though none of it belonged to me. I focused on the stage ahead, where the university banner hung crimson and gold, catching the light. The MC's voice echoed through the speakers, rolling over the crowd like a drumbeat. The first names were called one by one, each followed by cheers, applause, and the sharp click of cameras. The rhythm of pride built and built until the sound filled every corner of the hall. When they called Emily's name, the roar of her family almost drowned out the official applause. I clapped with everyone else smiling for her, while my eyes kept drifting toward the 3 empty seats that carried my family's name. Their stark vacancy seemed louder than all the cheering combined. Then it was my turn. I heard my name ring out clear and crisp. Madison Blake. But the MC didn't stop there. He announced my work, my title, my team. The words landed heavy in the silence before the eruption began. Leader of the AI research group. The software she developed has just been licensed by Oracle for $3.2 million. The hall exploded. People gasped, then clapped, the sound swelling like a wave breaking against the walls. Heads turned, whispers rippled. The camera lens swung directly onto me, and the screen above magnified my face until every student and parent could see me in detail. I stood, my knees unsteady but my back straight. I forced myself to smile, to nod graciously, to bow my head in thanks. The applause thundered in my ears, louder than anything I had ever heard. For a moment, I let myself absorb it, let the vibration of the crowd fill the hollow space inside me. I walked across the stage, each step deliberate, my cap held firm on my head. The dean shook my hand firmly and whispered congratulations. I accepted the diploma and turned to face the crowd again, lifting it slightly in acknowledgement. Flashbulbs lit the air like bursts of white fire. Yet, as my eyes scanned the hall, they found those 3 chairs again. The seats where my parents should have been. The seats where Rachel should have sat, pretending at least to care. They were empty, silent, cold. Against the sea of faces and the tidal wave of applause, those chairs were all I could see. I smiled wider, making it look natural, but the words that filled my head were not ones I could ever say aloud. If only they were here, if only they could see me now. The clapping went on, some students standing, my classmates cheering, but my heart sank under the noise. Every sound reminded me of the silence that had followed me for years. I let the audience see a proud graduate, but inside I was just a daughter staring at 3 empty chairs, wishing for something I had stopped believing would ever come. When the applause finally softened, I stepped down from the stage, holding the diploma carefully in my hand. My breath was steady, my face calm. I returned to my seat and sat down again, the noise still echoing in my ears. Around me, flowers changed hands, parents wept and clapped, siblings screamed names into the air. I stayed still, smiling faintly, the paper in my lap. For a moment I closed my eyes and listened. The sound was everything I had once wanted, everything I had thought would prove my worth. And yet it all circled the empty space in my chest, the same one that had been carved out years ago. The ceremony continued, name after name, cheer after cheer. I clapped for each one, but my eyes returned again and again to those 3 empty chairs. I held my diploma tighter as if that alone could anchor me in a room where I was both celebrated and completely alone. The moment the graduates began to file out of the hall, the sound changed. Inside had been thunderous orchestrated cheers rolling in waves with every name called. Outside it scattered, becoming pockets of joy, fathers shouting, mothers crying, siblings waving bouquets. The sunlight hit my face as I stepped through the double doors, blinking at the sudden brightness, and I slowed without meaning to. Everyone else was being swallowed up into groups, into arms, waiting to pull them close. I stood at the edge, my cap slightly crooked, holding my diploma like a fragile object that might disappear if I let go. Sophia found me first. I heard her before I saw her, calling my name with a voice that actually carried pride. She wove through the clusters of families, her gown catching on the wind, her smile wide and open. When she reached me, she didn't hesitate. She wrapped me in a hug so tight I almost forgot how empty I had felt seconds before. Her hair smelled faintly of lavender, and her voice was a whisper meant only for me. "I'm proud of you, Maddie." She pulled back then, eyes shining, and pressed a small box into my hand. Inside was a pen, sleek and silver, with my name engraved along the barrel. "For signing whatever comes next," she said with a grin. I held it carefully, tracing the letters with my thumb, and for a brief moment, I felt seen, anchored in something solid. Behind her, David hovered. He looked awkward, almost trapped in his own skin. David had never missed a chance to remind me during our early years that my work ethic was unnecessary, that I should loosen up, that late nights in the lab were pathetic. Now he shifted from foot to foot before finally clearing his throat. "You're good, really good. I didn't think you'd make it this far." I was wrong. His words sounded like gravel, like they had scraped their way out of him. I gave him a polite nod and said thank you. It was not forgiveness, not even close, but I could acknowledge that hearing it meant something. Then there was Professor Miller. His voice cut through the chaos, like it always had in lecture halls, firm but calm, precise but warm. He shook my hand with both of his, holding on a moment longer than necessary. "You've done exceptionally well, Madison. You've earned every bit of this." He looked at me as if he meant it, no hesitation, no obligation. That gaze steadied me. It gave me something my family never had: recognition without condition. All around us flashes went off. Parents posed with their children in front of banners, flowers passed from hand to hand, laughter rising in bubbles of celebration. I stood still, slightly apart, watching the tide of joy move without me. Then my phone buzzed. I slipped it from my gown pocket, the sunlight making the screen hard to read until I tilted it just right. The words were short, clean, almost sterile. "Congratulations. Call us tonight on video." For a second my chest tightened, breath caught between ribs. My hands shook just slightly. It was as if they had remembered at the very last moment that something had happened today, something worth acknowledgement, but even that acknowledgement was bound to their schedule, their priorities. Tonight's call would not be about me. It would be about Rachel's new apartment, about the moving truck, about how tired they were and how beautiful her place looked. The congratulations was nothing but an entry ticket into her story. I stared at the words until they blurred, then turned the phone over in my hand, the back warm from the sun. My classmates were lifting each other on shoulders, parents wiping away tears, siblings jostling to get into pictures. I slipped the phone back into my pocket as if I could bury the weight of the message there too, but it clung to me cold against my skin. Sophia tugged at my sleeve. "Come on, let's get a picture together." She pulled me into the frame, her arm hooked firmly around mine. We smiled at the camera, though mine felt stiff at the edges. She didn't let go right away, as if she knew I might float off otherwise. Then her own parents called her, waving from across the lawn with flowers in their arms, and she squeezed my hand before running off. I watched her melt into their embrace, the kind of embrace I could only imagine. David snapped a quick photo with a few classmates and was gone, swallowed into another group. Professor Miller was led away by a circle of proud families who wanted to thank him to shake the hand of the man who had guided their children. Slowly, the crowd thickened with parents' and friends' laughter bouncing off the walls of the courtyard. And I stood with a pen in one hand and a diploma in the other, surrounded by the echo of joy but untouched by it. My smile faded when no one was looking. My body felt rigid, as if I was balancing on a thin line between being part of something and being completely erased. The phone buzzed again, a reminder vibration that made my stomach sink. I didn't check it. I already knew it wasn't going to be the message I wanted. It was never going to be the message I wanted. So I stood tall, adjusted my cap that had begun to slip, and forced my shoulders back. If the camera lenses swung my way, they would not capture the hollow space inside me. They would capture a graduate smiling faintly, ready to walk into the next chapter. The courtyard roared with celebration, but for me the sound was distant, like waves crashing far out at sea. I breathed slowly, steadying myself, because this moment, this strange mixture of triumph and isolation, was mine to carry alone. And as I looked once more at those students embraced by their families, I pressed the engraved pen tighter in my hand and whispered silently to myself that I would never forget this feeling, no matter how far I went. That night I sat at my small desk, the dorm room quieter than I had ever heard it. The gown was folded neatly over the back of my chair, the diploma still resting in its leather case untouched since I had carried it across campus. I set my laptop down, the glow of the screen filling the dim room, and opened the video call link my parents had sent. Their faces appeared almost instantly, lit by the soft lamps of our old living room back in Portland. They looked cheerful, even energized, as if the day had been one of celebration for them too, though I knew where they had been. "Madison, honey," my mother's voice rang out brightly. "We're so sorry, you understand, right? Rachel really needed us today. The moving truck was late, and she couldn't possibly get all those boxes up the stairs alone." I nodded slowly, though my throat felt tight. "She needed you more than I did," I thought, but I didn't say it out loud. My father leaned in, smiling in that calm, practiced way of his. "You looked beautiful in your cap and gown, Maddie. We saw the pictures online. Your professor seemed proud. That must have been something." Something. The word landed like a pebble in my stomach. I swallowed and kept my expression neutral. It was something. They traded a look between them, then a look I knew all too well, the kind they shared before sliding into a request. My mother cleared her throat delicately. "So Rachel has been thinking about starting her photography studio. You know how talented she is. She has the eye, the passion. What she's missing is a little startup fund." I sat straighter, my fingers tightening around the warm mug of tea I had made earlier. I waited, though I already knew where this was going. "We thought," my father said slowly, choosing his words with an almost theatrical patience, "that maybe you could help. You have those funds now from your project, and you're doing so well. For you, it wouldn't even be much." The steam from my mug curled up toward my face, carrying the scent of chamomile, but it did nothing to calm me. My voice came out quieter than I expected, but steady. "That money is from my work. My late nights. My research. It's not spare change. It's not something to hand over because Rachel wants to decorate a studio." My mother's smile faltered, her lips pressing together as she blinked quickly. "Maddie, you're making it sound so harsh. She's your sister. Family helps each other." I set the mug down carefully on its coaster, the ceramic clicking against the wood. My hands remained on either side of it, steady now. "I help when I believe in something. I don't believe in funding a dream just because she has one. I won't put my money into something I don't trust." Silence stretched across the call. My father exhaled long and heavy, his shoulders shifting as if the weight of my words had pressed into him. "We'll talk about this later," he said finally, his tone edged with disappointment. My mother's face had changed, her features tightened into disapproval, the kind she reserved for when I didn't play along with the script. The warmth had drained from her eyes, leaving a sharpness that made me shiver despite the heat of my tea. "All right then," she said curtly, as if shutting a door. "We'll let you go." The call ended abruptly, their faces vanishing into black. The laptop screen returned to my reflection, faint and distorted, as if even the glass was unsure of me. I reached forward and closed the lid slowly, the soft click echoing too loud in the quiet room. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence settle around me. Outside, through the narrow window, I could hear faint laughter from the quad celebrations still unfolding for families that had come together for the day. My room was still, but it no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a stage after the curtain had dropped, lights gone, audience scattered. I picked up my pen again, the one Sophia had given me, turning it in my hands, the engraved letters glinting faintly in the lamplight. It reminded me that there was something I had built for myself, a truth that belonged only to me. Still, my chest ached. Not because of their absence anymore, but because I had finally said no. For the first time I had not bent, had not softened my edges to make space for Rachel's shadow. The ache was sharp, but beneath it there was a strange steadiness. I let the pen rest across my palms and sat quietly listening to the silence grow deeper. It was cold, but it was mine. The glow of the desk lamp stretched across the page of my notebook, but I could not focus on the pen in my hand any longer. My chest felt tight, heavy with words that had lived inside me for years, pressing, crowding, demanding release. I pushed the notebook aside, pulled the laptop back in front of me, and opened a blank email. The cursor blinked, steady and patient, waiting for me to begin. I typed slowly at first, "Dear Mom and Dad," and then stopped, staring at the greeting. My throat ached as if the words themselves resisted me. For so long I had tried to make them proud, with silence, with endurance, with achievements that never landed where I hoped they would. Tonight I could not hold any of it in anymore. Thank you for raising me. Thank you for the roof I grew up under and the food you worked to put on the table. I will always be grateful for the life you gave me. The words came easier once I started, though my fingers trembled. But I cannot continue to live in Rachel's shadow. I cannot keep pretending that your choices have not cut into me year after year. I paused, biting my lip, my eyes already burning. I remembered the birthdays. I wrote, "I remember turning 16, waiting at home with a cake from the grocery store while you took Rachel to pick out her dress. You came home late that night laughing, and I blew out candles alone." I told myself it did not matter, but it did. It always did. The ache in my chest sharpened as I thought of the science fair. I remember winning the state science award. I stood on the stage with my project, looking for you in the crowd. You were not there. You stayed home because Rachel had a cold. Not even serious, just a cold. I told myself it was fine, but I kept searching for your faces anyway. My hands hovered over the keys, but I forced them down one word at a time. And today. My graduation. 3 chairs in the front row with our family's name on them. Empty. You told me Rachel needed you to move boxes. Again she came first. Again I stood alone. Tears blurred the screen, dripping onto my hands, but I kept typing, my breathing uneven. I know you love me in your way. I know you believe Rachel needs more, and maybe she does. But I need you to understand that I am not less. I am not a background character in my own life. I have worked for every step, every dollar, every recognition I have, and I cannot and will not allow you to dismiss it anymore. My vision swam, but I blinked until the words returned. I will not give Rachel the money she asked for. I will not fund her dream because you think I have enough to spare. What I built is mine. I will use it for the life I am creating. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with everything I had buried until now. I am your daughter. I love you. But I will not keep accepting silence, absence, and excuses. If you want me in your lives, it will have to be as I am. No more less than. No more overlooked. I stared at the words stretched across the screen, paragraphs that seemed to pulse with a weight I had carried since childhood. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, frozen in the final moment before release. For the first time in my life, I was not hoping for their approval. I was giving them the truth. I reread it once, then again, the sentences ringing in my head. My chest felt raw, scraped open, but also lighter, like something long locked away had finally found air. I pressed my thumb against the trackpad, the cursor sliding toward the blue button. The word "send" glowed at me, quiet and final. My breath came fast. I closed my eyes and pressed down. The screen flickered, the message gone, carried into their inbox where I could not take it back. I leaned back slowly, the room spinning faintly as the release washed over me. My heart thudded hard against my ribs, my body trembling with the aftershock of finally saying what had been unsaid for years. Tears blurred everything hot and relentless, but beneath them was a strange lightness, fragile and undeniable. It felt like closing a door. And though my eyes burned, my chest eased as if at last a chapter had ended. Boxes lined the floor of my new apartment, stacked unevenly against freshly painted walls that still carried the faint smell of plaster and dust. The place was small, barely 2 rooms, but the light from the wide windows poured in like something alive, catching the surface of the bay in a shifting glow of silver and blue. From the balcony I could see the cranes of Mission Bay stretching tall against the skyline, and at night the bridge lights blinked softly, a reminder that I was starting again in a city that never truly slept. I set my coffee mug on the narrow counter, leaned against it, and let the silence fill me. It was different from the silence in my dorm or the silence of my childhood bedroom. This one felt chosen. No voices echoed through the walls. No footsteps threatened to interrupt. It was mine, and it was enough. My first day at Oracle began with the echo of my own heels on marble floors and the polite nods of strangers who glanced at me with the mixture of curiosity and calculation I had come to expect. Some recognized my name from the announcement at Stanford. Others whispered that I was too young to have led something worth millions. I caught fragments in the hallway, comments cloaked in skepticism, but I kept walking. In the office, the buzz of keyboards and the low murmur of engineers surrounded me. A man at the next desk leaned back, eyebrows raised. "You're the Stanford one, right? The one with the AI license?" His tone carried both doubt and challenge. I nodded and smiled, though my pulse raced. "Yes, that's me." His smirk softened and he said nothing else, turning back to his screen. It was the first of many such moments. Days stretched into weeks. I kept my head down and worked. At first, I was handed small tasks, cleanup assignments that no one else wanted. I did them well. Then came more responsibility. I stayed late combing through lines of code, running tests, documenting everything carefully. Slowly the room around me shifted. People stopped glancing over my shoulder, waiting for me to stumble. They began asking for my input, sliding chairs toward my desk during meetings, including me in the rhythm of their problem-solving. There were moments when exhaustion pressed hard against me, when the weight of proving myself threatened to swallow the joy I once felt in discovery. But every time my work clicked into place, every time a project cleared a hurdle because of something I caught or built, I felt it anchor deeper inside me. This was no longer about survival. It was about building a place I belonged. Outside of work, the city offered another kind of rhythm. The nonprofit I joined met every Saturday in a converted warehouse filled with long tables, outdated laptops, and the smell of marker ink and instant coffee. Girls from neighborhoods across San Francisco filled the space, some shy, some bold, most uncertain. They were high schoolers, barely older than I had been when I first sat in front of a computer with questions no one around me could answer. One girl stood out the first week. Hannah Lee, 17, her dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail, her notebook filled with messy sketches of websites she wanted to build. She tapped her pencil nervously against the table, eyes darting toward me as if afraid I might dismiss her before she even began. We started simple. I showed her how to write her first line of code. She frowned at the screen, biting her lip as the cursor blinked back at her. Minutes later, when she hit enter and saw the text appear where it should, her face lit up with a shock of joy so pure it caught me off guard. She looked at me wide-eyed. It worked. I can't believe it actually worked. I laughed, and for the first time in weeks, it was not the quiet laugh of politeness, but the kind that shook something free inside me. That's the magic of it, I told her. You write, you test, and suddenly the machine listens. By the third session, she was building small functions, racing through exercises faster than I expected. The other girls leaned over to watch her progress, and she sat taller each time, pride blooming in her shoulders. One afternoon, she ran across the room, laptop in her arms, code running perfectly. She reached me and, without warning, threw her arms around me, her excitement spilling into the air. Thank you. No one ever told me I could do this. I froze, the smell of cheap perfume and laundry soap clinging to her sweater. My throat closed, and I felt the heat rising behind my eyes. I managed to put my hands gently on her shoulders and say, "You did this, Hannah." Not me. But as I looked into her face bright with certainty, I saw something I had never seen in my parents' eyes. Recognition. Belief. That night, back in my apartment, I sat by the window watching the city lights stretch across the bay. The apartment was still cluttered with unopened boxes, the shelves still empty, but I felt something settle quietly inside me. Hannah's eyes had held the approval I had once begged from my own family. I realized I no longer needed it from them. The cranes outside swayed slightly in the wind, and the water shimmered with the last trace of daylight. I pressed my forehead against the glass and whispered to myself that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a life I could finally claim. The article appeared on a Tuesday morning, tucked between headlines about the city's housing market and a new tech merger. My name stretched across the page in bold letters, from abandoned graduate to Oracle engineer. My stomach twisted as I read, though the words were kinder than I expected. The journalist had attended the graduation ceremony, seen the empty seats, and now framed my story as one of resilience rather than pity. I had not asked for it yet. There it was, printed for the entire Bay Area to read. By lunchtime, my inbox was overflowing. Colleagues stopped by my desk, some with genuine congratulations, others with the polite curiosity reserved for office gossip. I smiled, thanked them, and tried to return my focus to the lines of code on my screen, but my phone buzzed nonstop against the desk. One voicemail caught my attention. Margaret Wilson, our old neighbor in Portland. Her voice cracked with both excitement and sympathy. "Everyone here is talking about you, Madison." The Chronicle article made the rounds fast. "Your parents. Well, people are saying they looked embarrassed at church on Sunday." She paused, then added softly, "I always knew you'd make it." I sat back in my chair, the weight of her words pressing down. Embarrassed. My parents had spent years putting Rachel in the spotlight, brushing me aside, yet now they were the ones avoiding eye contact in grocery store aisles. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. News of Rachel reached me in fragments. She had opened her photography studio, complete with glossy marketing and rented equipment. My mother's Facebook page was filled with posts about it, calling Rachel a visionary. But within months, cracks appeared. Contracts promised but never delivered. Clients complained about missed deadlines. Friends who once posed in her pictures began to fade from her social media. Then came the debt. I heard through Margaret again that my parents had taken out a second mortgage, whispering about loans from family friends to help Rachel keep the studio afloat. The more they gave, the more she seemed to need. At work, I pushed forward. My projects grew larger. I sat in meetings where my opinion was sought, not dismissed. Yet, even in those moments of professional triumph, my phone would light up with messages from Portland. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I felt the vibration in my pocket and pulled out the phone. A long message from Rachel filled the screen. She wrote about the studio collapsing, about bills she could not pay, about betrayal from people she thought were loyal. Her words were frantic, punctuated with desperation. She begged for help, reminding me that I was her sister, that family should come first. I stopped on the sidewalk, the city buzzing around me, and read it twice. For years I had rehearsed what I might say if she ever reached out with something like this. Anger, sarcasm, indifference. But as the words blinked back at me under the glow of a streetlight, I felt none of those. Only clarity. I slipped the phone back into my bag without responding. My hands were steady, my chest strangely light. By the time I reached my apartment, I had made tea and sat by the window watching the bay as the sky darkened. The phone buzzed again. Another message, this time shorter. "Please. Just something small to get me through." I set the cup down gently and looked at the screen. The desperation was almost palpable, as if I could hear her voice trembling. But I had nothing left to give her. Not because I lacked the means, but because I had finally accepted that her failures were not mine to fix. My parents might drain themselves to patch the holes she kept tearing open, but I would not. I placed the phone face down on the table and let the steam from the tea brush against my cheek. A smile tugged at the corners of my mouth, not cruel, not triumphant, but calm. For the first time, I felt no guilt in saying no, even if it was only in silence. Outside, the city moved as it always did, lights flickering across the water, cars threading through streets that had learned to hold both triumph and collapse without judgment. I leaned back in my chair, folded my arms, and let the moment settle over me like a long-awaited answer. The invitation to the talk show arrived in an email that I almost deleted, assuming it was another generic request for comments about women in tech. Instead, it was a quiet, respectful note from a producer who had read the Chronicle piece and wanted me to share my story on their evening program. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling the familiar tug between hiding and stepping forward. Then I wrote back and said yes. A week later, I stood behind a curtain that smelled faintly of hairspray and fresh paint, while a makeup artist dabbed powder along my cheekbones. A sound tech clipped a tiny mic to my collar and asked me to count to 10. My voice came out even, which surprised me. In my head, the images moved in a steady loop. The 3 empty seats. The long walk across the stage. The glow of the bay outside my apartment. Hannah's eyes when her code ran for the first time. Professor Miller's hand closing around mine in a grip that said, "I see you." I pressed my palms together and reminded myself that I was not here to ask for sympathy. I was here to tell the truth about what silence can do and what stepping out of it can change. The host met me at the edge of the set with a smile that felt real. We took our seats under lights that made the room look warmer than it was. Cameras blinked and rolled. The red tally light steadied and the music faded. The host introduced me with a few sentences that skimmed the surface of my work, and then asked how the day of my graduation had unfolded from my point of view. I breathed once and began. I said that the hall was full and the air felt thin, that the sound of other people's joy had a weight to it. I described how my name was called, how the crowd rose, how the number from Oracle rippled through the room like a wave. Then I said the part that still caught on my ribs when I spoke it. There were 3 seats in the front row with my family's name on them. They were empty. The host stayed quiet, which was the kindest thing she could have done. I kept going. I said that I did not share this to shame anyone, but to make visible what happens when patterns in a family go unchallenged for years. I said that absence leaves a shape, and if you are not careful, you start building your life around it. The audience did not fidget. They did not murmur. They listened like they knew the shape I meant. We talked about work then, about how moving to San Francisco felt like learning the steps to a new dance, awkward at first and then steady. I said that respect at the office came in small increments at the beginning and then all at once after the first project landed. I mentioned the nonprofit on Saturdays and Hannah's laugh when the screen finally did what she had asked it to do. The host smiled at that, and so did I. She asked what I would say to the younger version of myself who sat alone at a kitchen table with a cold birthday cake, or who looked out from a stage into a crowd where no one waved back. I felt the answer loosen in my chest, simple and clear. I said that the biggest lesson I have learned is that value is not something you beg for, it is something you create and give to yourself. If you wait for someone else to hand it to you, you will spend your life standing in a line that never moves. For a beat, the studio was quiet. Then the audience applauded, not loudly, but in a way that felt like agreement. A woman in the first row pressed her fingers to her mouth and nodded. The host thanked me and moved the conversation toward the future, toward what I hoped to build next, toward what mentoring meant to me now that I understood what it had done for me in the absence of family praise. I said that I wanted to make rooms where girls did not have to shout to be heard, where they could try and fail and try again without being labeled too much or too little. I said that the point was not to replace one spotlight with another, but to show them how to build their own light and carry it. After the show ended, the host squeezed my hand and told me her daughter had started taking a coding class. A producer thanked me for being candid. A camera operator nodded as if we had exchanged a message neither of us needed to say out loud. I walked out of the studio into a dusk that smelled like the ocean. The evening was cool enough to raise goosebumps along my arms, but the air felt clean in my lungs. I drove without turning on the radio, letting the quiet fill the car. The city slid by in streaks of gold and red streetlights fluttering to life windows, widening into little stages where other people's dinners and arguments and lullabies were unfolding. I could have taken the quick way home. Instead, I turned toward the bridge, the long red sweep of it rising out of mist, like something built to hold not just cars but the weight of decisions. The wind picked up as I reached the span, and the cables began their low, familiar hum. The sun was dropping toward the lip of the Pacific, laying a band of copper across the water. Seagulls tilted and corrected in the currents as if the air itself was a river and they could read its bottom. I rolled my window down and the wind rushed in, pulling at my hair, pressing cold against my cheeks. On the passenger seat sat the pen Sophia had given me on graduation day, still in its velvet box, and beside it a file folder with notes from work and a program from the talk show tucked inside. I pressed my palm lightly to the folder to keep it from shifting when the car moved, a small instinct to protect what I had chosen. I thought of Rachel's messages that I had never answered and of the way my parents had fallen into silence after my email. I did not feel a lurch of guilt this time. I felt relief that the lines I had drawn were holding. Halfway across the bridge, the light changed. The city behind me blushed with pink and rose, and then sank into purple while the sky ahead burned a deep orange at the rim. The water below reflected it all in a shiver that looked like it might catch fire, and then darken like breath on glass, fading back to clarity. I let the car glide, not fast, not slow, and let the air take what it wanted from the open window. I thought of the girl I had been, the one who believed that if she became brilliant enough, obedient enough, tireless enough, her parents would look up and see her. I wanted to reach back and take her hand, not to lead her anywhere different, but to whisper that she would survive the waiting. She would learn that applause from strangers is not a cure, and that even love from family can be too small if it requires shrinking yourself to fit it. She would also learn that other kinds of love exist, the kind that looks you in the face and says, "Keep going," the kind that hands you a pen engraved with your name, the kind that bursts from a 17-year-old when a function finally runs. And she believes in herself because you believed first. By the time I reached the far side of the bridge, the sky had slipped into the last edges of day. I pulled into a turnout and stopped. I sat with the engine off and watched the water move, thin white lines where the tides met and argued. My phone vibrated once in the console. I did not look. I did not need to. Whatever waited, there could wait a little longer. When I finally turned the car around and headed back toward the city, I felt the kind of tired that follows peace rather than defeat. The road unspooled ahead, familiar now, and I knew I would go home to a small apartment filled with boxes that I no longer resented. I would set the pen back on the shelf. I would mark up the file for work in the morning. On Saturday, I would see Hannah again and ask her what she wanted to build next. The shape left by those empty chairs was still in me, but it was no longer an outline I had to match. If you have ever sat in a room full of celebration and felt invisible, if you have ever been compared to someone you could never be, I want to hear where you are listening from and what you carried through to this moment. Share your story in the comments so we can hold it together. If this journey spoke to you, stay with me here and tap like and subscribe so more voices like ours can find a place to be heard.